At first glance, it's hard to imagine that Tehran is facing the toughest economic sanctions in its history. Yet behind the shop window of a modern city, the middle and working classes are being strangled by soaring prices and unemployment. Akram lost her job in a factory in 2010 during the previous wave of sanctions. Today, history repeats itself for this mother who has converted to dressmaking.
Day to day, these sanctions are really making us suffer. We can't cope anymore. It's very difficult. Compared to 2, 3, 4 years ago, we have much less work. Before, we'd receive orders from all over, but they have declined dramatically, so the workshop is often closed. We can no longer cope with housing costs, paying the children's school fees, healthcare costs. For example, I have a bad back. I should stop work, but I have no choice. I must carry on working so as not to lose the little I earn here.
With just 60 euros per month, Akram's daily life has become a constant struggle to support herself and her son.
It's really expensive. To buy rice, I have to ask for help from a charity. Now I can't afford a simple bag of rice. It's the same for legumes. I honestly don't buy any more. That's the truth. It's impossible. On my budget, the most I can do is buy cheese. Before it was 1,000 tomans. Now it costs 10,000. As for red meat, I don't even come close. It's way too expensive. Hello. Can you put it through item by item so I'm sure the price doesn't exceed 100,000 tomans? How much is that?
54,000 toman.
This is the paradox of sanctions. Products are available, but because of rampant inflation, not much is accessible to the Iranian people, who now survive thanks to state aid.
Mishad, please come and help. Take this. Thank you.
At 17, Akram's son has had to give up his passion, football. He takes on odd jobs to pay for his studies.
Work-wise, it's hard for young people, especially graduates. Sometimes young people with degrees are unemployed. Our leaders must do something so that later we're not in the same situation. The Westerners want us to rise up and take to the streets against the state. They want to give a good image of themselves and have us believe that our state mistreats us, doesn't look after us. Therefore, we shouldn't support it. Up to now, they haven't succeeded, and if we stick together, they never will.
Far from the daily restrictions, propaganda praises the country's economic independence from foreigners. The regime's hard line has always opposed Iran opening up to the world. Its insular discourse is fueled by this permanent fight against America.
To say that sanctions have an impact, yes, they have an impact, but we will face them. You know, it isn't easy to put a country that has a border with 15 neighbors under embargo. You can already hear the cracks appearing in the wall of sanctions. Watch as the United States gradually lose their international support. For our part, we remain focused on our own production capacities.
In 1 year, Iran's gross domestic product has fallen by 9%. Despite the regime's claims, many companies are dependent on foreign imports. In Kashan, central Iran, the entire traditional carpet manufacturing industry is dying under the effects of the embargo.
At the start of the sanctions, there were about 350 such dyers in Kashan, and today only 5 remain. Products imported from abroad have become as rare as gold. For example, it's very hard to find thread and wool from abroad. I'm one of the last remaining in this job. I earn a pathetic wage that stops me starving to death. I have to go and work in other factories and do other activities to feed my family. As a result of this embargo, the chemical ink we usually use for dyeing has become 15 to 20 times more expensive. We are ashamed to sell our products at this price to carpet producers because they too will suffer. They can't get by. They cannot make a profit. Craftsmen aren't getting enough to eat. They have nothing left, and no one to support them.
The choices are few for these workers who, over the last 40 years, have only known a regime of sanctions. Since Ayatollah Khomeini came to power, relations between Iran and the United States have been punctuated by embargoes. The taking hostage of US embassy staff in Tehran in the early days of the revolution triggered the first wave of sanctions announced by President Carter in Washington.
Our position is clear. The United States will not yield.
Considered a crime of lèse-majesté, the detention of 52 embassy civilians and diplomats for 444 days has haunted relations between the two countries ever since. Dozens of retaliatory measures followed as diplomacy advanced, then faltered. Arms embargo and freezing of Iranian assets during the Iran-Iraq war. Sanctions against foreign companies in Iran in the 1990s. The Mullah's Republic was accused of financing terrorism through the Revolutionary Guard. This paramilitary organization, under the direct authority of the supreme leader, arms and trains Hezbollah in Lebanon and Palestinian resistance movements. It threatens Israel and supports Shia militias throughout the Middle East. Years of a shadow war against the interests of the United States and their allies.
The United States of America will not permit the world's most dangerous regimes to threaten us with the world's most destructive weapons.
Branded as part of the axis of evil by George W. Bush, Iran attracted the ire of Republican neocons in the 2000s, as well as Democrats. Thus, Barack Obama began a new series of sanctions against Tehran, joined by the UN and Europe. The international community then hoped to contain the nuclear ambitions of the Islamic Republic, led by the very conservative Mahmoud Ahmadinejad.
During the Bush administration, and certainly during the Obama administration, sanctions were intended to be leverage for diplomatic success. That was the point, that you were going to apply pressure so that you could take it away as part of a negotiated agreement to deal with the nuclear issue. Obama would not have been sad if the regime had transformed itself. A true democracy emerging inside of Iran, I think, would be something that would be appreciated by countries around the world. But Obama explicitly said that Iran's government is Iran's government, and that we respect the sovereignty of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So he was not looking to change the regime in Iran.
5 years later, in Vienna, this sanctions policy was a great success. After long years of negotiations, Iran and the 5 permanent member states of the UN Security Council, along with Europe and Germany, signed an historic agreement. The Islamic Republic officially renounced nuclear weapons in exchange for the gradual lifting of international sanctions.
This nuclear deal meets the national security interests of the United States and our allies. It prevents the most serious threat, Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon, which would only make the other problems that Iran may cause even worse. That's why this deal makes our country and the world safer and more secure.
Obama looked at the Middle East as a region that had always complicated U.S. Foreign policies. And he was looking to try and find a way of getting us out of the Middle East quagmire that he saw, with whether it's with Iraq or whether it's with Afghanistan or the broader regional conflict. And I think he thought that trying to get a resolution of the nuclear issue and other regional issues with Iran would be one step towards doing that. That didn't mean that he thought that that would transform the Middle East or that he was trying to hand Iran control of the Middle East, as some of his opponents have said. But I think Obama believed that a nuclear agreement would be one of the first steps towards a different U.S. relationship and U.S. set of interests in the Middle East than what it had been over the course of the last 20 or 30 years.
The Iranians never said, we are signing this agreement, which means that we intend to modify our position with regard to Syria, Iraq and Yemen. No, that wasn't in the contract. Though not perfect, this agreement provided certainty that in 10, 15, 18, 20 years, according to the clauses, there is an absolute prohibition on military nuclear technology under the control of the IAEA.
Nobody will get all they want. We didn't get all we wanted. The United States didn't get all they wanted. French, Germany, Britain, even China and Russia didn't get all they wanted. And it's the nature of this type of negotiations. I wouldn't accuse anybody of being tough or being soft. It's just a process of negotiations.
The Vienna Agreement, or JCPOA, brought great hope to those Iranians who favor the opening up of their country. A consecration, too, for President Rouhani and his Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mohammad Zarif.
This was the victory of the moderates, with the support of the Supreme Leader. The calculated support, let's say as it wasn't wholehearted, but Rouhani and his teams couldn't have gone any further in shaping the agreement if they hadn't had the green light of the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, who, as we know, is not exactly a moderate.
In fact, the day after the signing of a nuclear agreement, McKinsey published a report providing for $1 trillion in investment over the next 20 years. The return of Iran to the international financial system, to the Council of Nations, was the equivalent of the integration of all the Eastern European countries after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Those were the stakes involved.
The major European groups were among the first to commit to this new market: aeronautics, hydrocarbons, automobiles. Contracts were signed at the highest levels of state, with the promise of new factories and new jobs in Iran. After a 5-year absence, Total was back in Tehran, Its CEO, Patrick Pouyanné, committed to buying 150,000 barrels of oil per day and to developing South Pars, the world's largest gas field.
The gamble taken by the Iranian reformists is the idea that, let's say it's the same gamble taken by the European and American parties, President Obama, that of giving Iran economic opening that will lead to a social opening. So the JCPOA's gamble is that the economic gains, in return for abandoning nuclear power, will raise the standard of living for Iranians in Iran. That implies foreign investment.
In Iran, this entry into globalization harms the interests of some close to the regime. The Revolutionary Guard, far from sticking to their role as military elite, have largely profited from the sanctions and control part of the economy.
The Pasdaran, Sepah, IRGC, whatever you would like to call them, takes advantage in many ways. They control all aspects of imports and exports in a situation like this. And they operate sort of like mafia bosses. They control the flow of counterfeit goods, things like alcohol and cigarettes from other countries, food. In this sort of circumstance, they really gain. And having lived through the previous round of heavy sanctions in 2012 and 2013, the thing that I noticed most acutely was the massive wealth gap that was created. You had a whole new class of people, a smaller group of people, who had tons of money, limitless money.
One of the primary opponents to the JCPOA was the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. It signaled a couple of things for them. One, it signaled a kind of rapprochement with the West to some degree, and that's antithetical to their hold on power and the concentration of wealth that they want. If Iran was going to get an increased economic benefit under the JCPOA, it was very clear that they couldn't get that benefit if the IRGC had its tentacles in those companies. The US and the European Union were going to maintain significant sanctions on the IRGC even after the lifting of sanctions under the JCPOA, and so Iran had to get the IRGC out of those companies.
A delicate economic context, especially since the nuclear agreements had a taste of unfinished business. They didn't lift sanctions for US companies.
American companies cannot go to work in Iran. We can't use the dollar. We can't have a single American person involved in this project. And when I go to the US, I'm banned from looking after Iranian business. So the framework is relatively strict, but at the same time, it enables a project to develop. So the framework is possible. We know we can work, we're well aware of the risk, but at the same time, fortune favors the bold. Or at least, that's the gamble. For us, managing this whole affair meant walking a line between daring and recklessness.
Investors still fear the wrath of the US Treasury. Over the years, it has become a war machine in the service of US sanctions policy. Its weapon? The dollar. Any transaction linking the US currency to Iran is considered a violation of the embargo. Europeans cannot forget the record fines paid by British banks, Deutsche Bank, and in the latest wave of sanctions by BNP Paribas.
BNPP continued to engage in this activity even after they were being told by their own lawyers that the conduct was illegal. The nature and scope of BNPP's criminal conduct far exceeded that in any previous criminal sanctions case that's been resolved by the Department of Justice. Today's nearly $9 billion penalty represents the staggering total volume of provable criminal conduct on BNP's part.
Sanctions imposed on foreign companies are totally disproportionate to the offence committed. This bank was sentenced to pay $9.3 billion for having broken US law. Why? Because it had banking establishments in the USA and managed dollar transactions. You should know that when you use the dollar, it directly opens the application of American law and the opening of American jurisdiction. Except that $9.3 billion was totally out of sync with the offence BNP had committed. It's actually this fear of disproportionate sanctions that scares everyone.
In the United States, part of the political class is deeply opposed to the nuclear agreements. Powerful lobbies, such as UANI, are undermining their implementation. This organization, close to Israel and Saudi Arabia, counts former members of the Bush administration among its ranks. Its aggressive methods, threats, corporate pressure worry potential investors.
I had a theory that we could engage in economic warfare. Instead of using soldiers and bullets, to try to use pen and ink to convince a regime to change its behavior, not only for the benefit of the United States, but for France and the Iranian people even. I've contacted hundreds of French companies and delegations, but I've also sent thousands of letters to Italians, Germans, Chinese, Russians, Americans. And look, my letter is very simple. It's basically a similar letter. We do very accurate research. And if your television channel was trying to profit and make money in Iran, they would get a letter from me. And I would say to your company, look, you're making a decision to do business with the most oppressive, brutal, nuclear weapon-seeking regime in the world. I would suggest to you that that's wrong.
Certain companies contacted me to show me these letters. They're extremely detailed, what you might call letters of intimidation. They're told that they run considerable risks by trading with Iran, and beyond the legal risks, they're taking a risk with their reputation in the USA, with the American public, American customers, their suppliers, their clients, etc. So they risk destroying the position they've built in the United States.
Among the founding members of UANI, John Bolton, neoconservative architect of the war in Iraq under Bush and pro-military intervention in Iran.
I have said for over 10 years since coming to these events that the declared policy of the United States of America should be the overthrow of the mullah's regime in Tehran. And that's why before 2019, we here will celebrate in Tehran. Thank you very much.
On January 20, 2017, those neocons taking a hard line towards Iran could rejoice. Donald Trump, fervent opponent of the nuclear agreements, was sworn in as President of the United States.
He had made it very clear that he did not like anything that Barack Obama had done. So one of his major tasks in life was to destroy the legacy of Barack Obama. He had also criticized the nuclear agreement, but I think most of that criticism is to please various pressure groups in the United States rather than to advance the interest of the United States. I think if the United States is interested in non-proliferation, then it won't get a better deal than the JCPOA.
In March 2018, Donald Trump hired John Bolton as National Security Advisor. The showdown with the Islamic Republic could begin.
The fact is, this was a horrible, one-sided deal that should have never, ever been made. It didn't bring calm, it didn't bring peace, and it never will. I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. In a few moments, I will sign a presidential memorandum to begin reinstating U.S. nuclear sanctions on the Iranian regime.
The US president unveiled his policy of maximum pressure, a series of sanctions on a scale unprecedented since the founding of the Islamic Republic.
Trump said he wanted to negotiate with the Iranians as a way of pushing the Iranians to the negotiating table Pompeo, his Secretary of State, presented Iran with a list of 12 demands, preconditions for negotiation, the conditions of an agreement, which were totally one-sided, draconian for the Iranians, for the Iranian regime, because accepting these conditions was actually committing suicide. On the one hand, denouncing the agreement when it was being observed by the Iranians, and on the other, demanding they negotiate a new agreement that included not only nuclear issues, but also everything else going on in the Middle East, plus the ballistic issue. It was a case of not really knowing what you're dealing with.
ما نمی‌توانیم دعوت به مذاکره کسانی را باور کنیم که اعلام می‌کنند سخت‌ترین تحریم‌های تاریخ را علیه کرامت و معیشت ملتمان اعمال کردند.
Since the spring of 2019, Washington has imposed a total embargo on Iranian oil, which accounts for 80% of state revenues. Tankers sit off Bandar Abbas, the country's main port, waiting for a buyer. Crude oil exports are in freefall. Even the Chinese have partially complied with sanctions, but they continue to discreetly buy hundreds of thousands of barrels of crude and transport manufactured products to the Iranian coasts. The market is risky. Information on Iran's trade with third-tier countries has become highly sensitive. Washington and Tehran are waging an intense intelligence war.
We will employ all possible means to export our oil, our gas, and all our petroleum products. We will use all methods. This, it is our right. No national authority can sanction us for this. The Americans' embargo is unlawful. It is illegal pressure imposed on others. I have said repeatedly that oil should not be a political issue. Governments should not use oil as a weapon for political gain.
Iran is no longer selling its oil, so it threatens global supply. In the waters of the Persian Gulf, the Revolutionary Guard naval forces carry out targeted attacks on foreign tankers. With the impounding of a British tanker and the destruction of a US Navy drone off the coast, the mullah's regime is testing the Americans' capacity to react and the warlike declarations of their president.
He's been making this type of announcement for years. But he's a megalomaniac. He'd say, if Iran does this, we'll do that. But when we hit their drone, what did he do? Shoot. But what did he shoot? A tweet. He just fired off a few tweets.
Threatening the Persian Gulf and resuming nuclear activity, Iran decides to renew uranium enrichment beyond the threshold set by the international community.
Iran shifts from what it calls maximum patience to maximum resistance. And it's their way of saying that, look, we're not going to just sit as this economic pressure mounts. And we also haven't seen the Europeans and the other members of the nuclear deal do what we expect from them in terms of economic normalization, that key bargain in the nuclear deal. And so we are going to respond in the ways that we can. One is we're going to stop
complying fully with the JCPOA. And every 60 days, we are going to breach some of the restrictions that the deal has, not because we want a nuclear weapon, but because this is how we can kind of add an impetus to efforts to stabilize the deal. That is the Iranian argument.
What the Iranians are trying to do, I mean, they're really trying to build leverage, not a bomb right now. They want to build leverage against the Europeans, against the US, to try to compel some economic assistance and to have something to trade away once negotiations start up again, which might be a couple of years down the line.
Summit after summit, Germans, British and French promised to save the nuclear agreements, to brave the American sanctions, particularly thanks to Instex, a financial mechanism designed to short-circuit the dollar.
Das wird dazu beitragen, dass auch im Iran anerkannt werden muss, dass wir unseren Teil zur Erfüllung unserer Verpflichtungen tun. Und wir erwarten jetzt vom Iran, dass er auch seinen Teil seiner Verpflichtungen erfüllt, in diesem Abkommen bleibt und sich auch dem Abkommen gemäß verhält.
Take all of the initiatives proposed by Europe. One after the next ended in failure. They announced the creation of a fund which was to finance major industrial projects in Iran. We haven't seen a ghost of the reality of the transposition of this fund. They said we're going to ask Pompeo, US Secretary of State, for exemption for major European firms like PSA, Total, Renault, to continue working in Iran. And the answer came in writing, no. I had contacts with the US authorities, with the Secretary of State. The Secretary of the Treasury met with me, and when I asked if there was any room for discussion whatever, clearly said, there's no room. The decision is very clear. We've decided to pull out of this agreement, and we'll see it through. That's the theory behind the maximum pressure sanctions.
The question is whether Europe wants to use its weight, whether Europe wants to use its clout, or whether it wants the United States to be able to advance its policies which are detrimental to European interests without even spending a dime. The United States only threatens, and it can advance its policies. It's not even spending a dime. It's not even investing. And Europe simply takes that threat.
In Iran, the hope created by the Vienna agreements has given way to frustration. Contracts signed by major European corporations went unheeded. No multinational, however powerful, could risk falling foul of American sanctions.
It's a pretty diabolical system, in fact. The US president has a list of 12 sanctions and can choose up to 5. We don't know which. Among the 12, some are totally systemic and lethal for a company like Total. You can ban Total from using the American financial system, so I couldn't use the banking system. For a global international company, if I can no longer issue dollar bonds, I won't be able to run Total. You can ban any American from holding shares in Total. 30% of my shareholders are American. So what the sanctions reveal, in fact, is the power of American capitalism, imposing its American vision on international companies.
The multinationals stepped away, and the Iranian population daily suffers the pernicious effects of sanctions. Every economic sector is affected, including that of health, which should be exempt. Medicines imported from Europe struggle to reach Iran's pharmacies.
It's for my wife's chemotherapy. Why have they put this medicine under embargo? What do they expect the sick to do? What do they want from patients? Every country is in the grip of the Americans. Anything the USA says, the others follow. France, Germany, Britain, they follow. Why? What have you got against sick people?
Iran has its own pharmaceutical industry, but drugs with complex molecules, such as cancer treatment and rare diseases, are only produced abroad. In this pharmacy, around 40 of them are out of stock. For patients who can afford it, the black market is always booming.
Go see how much they're selling for under the bridge over there. It's all their fault. I don't know how they get them. Drugs that have to stay cool, they sell them to people in the street.
We're under embargo, but where do they get these drugs that sell for a fortune in other pharmacies? How do they fall into the hands of profiteers? Who are these people?
Sir, those who say there are medicines everywhere are talking nonsense. If you sell to the highest bidder, there's plenty. If we don't import them, then where do these drugs come from? Think about it. My turn. Foreigners pity us, I swear.
The health crisis is looming. At Mahak Hospital, which specializes in the care of children with cancer, staff fight daily to ensure continuity of treatment. This establishment is an institution in Iran. It welcomes children and their families from all over the country free of charge, thanks to private donations. Never, since its creation 20 years ago, have sanctions had such a negative effect on the way it runs.
We are continually asking people who have the chance to travel abroad to bring us any medicine they can collect. To date, thanks to these efforts, no child has yet died in this hospital from a shortage of drugs. We managed to continue protocols, but all that is very provisional. Today we can manage, but tomorrow, in 2 weeks, when we can't find anyone to bring us treatments from abroad, we'll be faced with a serious problem.
The hospital management alerted the UN, the European authorities, and the Swiss government to these supply difficulties. Despite promises, no solution has yet been found.
Asha as well? There's no problem? Fine, thank you.
There is a form of duplicity in the imposition of sanctions. The American government announced, and this was confirmed by the Europeans, that the sanctions would not apply to food and medicine. But to bring them in, you don't even need a license. But in fact, we have no way of transferring money to buy medical equipment and spare parts. The people who implemented these sanctions are aware of these problems and their consequences. And so we ask ourselves, why can no international institution remedy this problem?
Today, I want to talk directly to the Iranian people to dispel myths about U.S. sanctions that continue to be promoted by the Iranian regime. Under our laws, a general license is in place today that allows medical devices to be exported from the United States to the Iranian people. The United States has a great respect for the people of Iran and does not seek to prevent them from accessing medical supplies or care. President Trump is committed to supporting the people of Iran and hopes one day for a better future between our two peoples.
You can say that humanitarian trade is exempted, it is, but when the owner of probably 90+% of the foreign exchange in Iran or available to Iran is the central bank, which can't be used for that trade now, it's hard to say that trade can happen. And so that's been a particular failing of the Trump administration's policy, is both kind of the steps taken to close off those areas that are available for that kind of trade, and the kind of unwillingness of the administration and its officials to support that trade. And it's been a real problem. It makes life for the ordinary Iranians worse, even though the administration claims to support ordinary Iranians. And it's plain bad policy. That's all it is.
In the fall of 2019, Saudi Arabia was the target of an unprecedented attack on its oil installations. Although claimed by Houthi rebels from Yemen, Iran's responsibility is hardly in doubt. By attacking one of the United States' closest allies in the Middle East, the Republic of Mullahs was taking a new step in its policy of maximum resistance. What would be the response of Donald Trump, whose campaign promise was US military disengagement? Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's tour to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates was not enough to reassure their allies, collateral victims of the American policy of sanctions.
It was indeed a shock for the Saudis, who realized their fragility. In fact, it created a shock almost everywhere, because the sophistication of the operation, it was a brilliant tactical success, it must be said, gave food for thought to all the general staff in the region and beyond. The Israelis, for example, analyzed this a lot, and have had to think hard about the way to counter this type of threat.
Our neighbors in Saudi Arabia need to realize that they cannot be the hegemons of this region. We and Saudi Arabia can contribute together to peace and stability in this region, and that is why we called for a regional dialogue forum in the Persian Gulf. We called for a non-aggression pact in the Persian Gulf. These are the solutions, not trying to buy security from the United States or from Europe. Security cannot be purchased. Security has to be produced from within.
If Iran is to conduct such a major attack, not only against Saudi Arabia, but against the global oil market, and the US is willing to do precisely nothing, that sends a very powerful signal. It sends a green light to the Iranians that they can go ahead and continue pushing the envelope. And it tells the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Israelis that they're on their own, more or less.
Do I want war? I don't want war with anybody. I'm somebody that would like not to have war. We have the strongest military in the world. We've spent more than $1.5 trillion in the last short period of time on our military. Nobody's even come close. We have the best equipment in the world. We have the best missiles.
I think it's important for Iran to see that if they punch us, that there has to be at least some sort of punch back, and then they will back away. And by not responding effectively, we create a more dangerous environment. But to say that there was no military response was unfortunate.
By provoking Washington too much, Iran ended up going too far. Nearly 40 years to the day after the storming of the US Embassy in Tehran, the US Embassy in Iraq was attacked by pro-Iranian Shia militias. Intolerable for Donald Trump, who sees behind these demonstrations the vice-like grip of the Revolutionary Guard. His riposte reached the heart of the regime. January 5, 2020, millions of Iranians mourned General Qasem Soleimani. The head of Revolutionary Guard External Operations was killed by an American strike.
We killed the #1 terrorist in the world, Stalemate, and it should have been done 20 years ago. We'll see you at the game. Thank you.
He was offered several choices, and he went for the most transgressive, in a way, to hit an official figure and to kill him, not on a battlefield, which would have been normal in a fight between enemies, but like a vulgar terrorist, shooting him down like Osama bin Laden.
This swept aside protests about the cost of living and restrictions due to sanctions. Qasem Soleimani was seen as the hero of the Iran-Iraq war, the one who drove back Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. His assassination once again fueled Iranian anti-American feeling, the cement of the Islamic Republic for 40 years.
Millions of people took to the streets to pay tribute to Soleimani. But that was spontaneous. The regime can always drum up a few 100,000 in the street by mobilizing its troops, its followers, by providing buses. But there, what we saw was unexpected. There really was a popular, collective, spontaneous emotion. But this was Iran. Iran as a nation. It was the honor of Iran. Beyond the regime, even if you don't like them, it was the honor of Iran that was attacked. And that's something about which the Iranians can get quite touchy, it must be said.
Washington said they were weakened by the sanctions policy, discredited by the population since the Revolutionary Guard shot down a Ukrainian plane by mistake above Tehran. At Friday prayers, the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, brushed criticism aside. No excuses for the 176 who died in the air crash. The moderates, including President Rouhani, could only close ranks behind their leader.
Do the sanctions change the way they behave? Are they more concerned with acknowledging and addressing the concerns of average people, or more concerned with maintaining their own system? And I would say so far, they've shown that they're most concerned with maintaining their system. There might come a day where they have to respond to a lot of public pressure. We've seen various types of protests over the past couple of years, more and more in the realm of protests against the economic situation, but it has not created a groundswell of protest against the regime as such. And so far, there isn't a real indication that that's happening in the coming days or months.
Generally speaking, though, sanctions are not a regime change tool. It's not realistic to just impose sanctions on somebody, walk away, and hope if you come back in 3 or 4 years that the regime will have changed. They don't work that way. You need to have a broader set of negotiations, and you have to give the regime that you're trying to pressure some incentive to actually change, too. If the only change they can have is being removed from power, it's going to be pretty hard to dislodge them.
Far from forcing Iran into dialogue, the American policy of maximum sanction has pushed the country to extremes. Freed from the Vienna agreements, the Islamic Republic no longer limits itself to uranium enrichment. In just a few months, it could have the equipment needed to make nuclear weapons. The Iranians' dream of openness was smashed on the old demons of its regime. More than ever, Iran is threatening the world to ensure its own survival from its faithful American enemy.